an ordinary flight, an extraordinary child, and an injustice that sent shockwaves through business class. The announcements in the business class cabin were heard, the flight attendant's steady voice reminding the passengers to take their seats. Oliver, an 8-year-old boy, clutched the worn teddy bear tightly in his hands, his round brown eyes sparkling with worry. He clung to his mother, his little fingers digging into her sweater, as if he let go, he would be swallowed up by the vast world around him. His mother, Claire, gently bent down and rubbed her son's back. "It's okay, honey, it's just a flight. We've flown so many times, remember?" Oliver didn't answer. He didn't like flying. Not because of the height, not because of the shaking when taking off, but because of the eyes. The prying, curious, uncomfortable eyes, every time he unconsciously made repetitive sounds. He didn't want to bother anyone, but his brain worked differently than other people. And when he was stressed, small whispers escaped his mouth like a reflex. "And it begins." It was just a soft sound, like a staccato melody that he whispered to himself to calm himself down. But in the quiet cabin, among the well-dressed passengers, those sounds quickly became the focus. A middle-aged man, dressed in a neat suit, sitting in the front, turned his head. He frowned, his eyes clearly showing his discomfort. "What's wrong with this child?" His voice was low but loud enough for those around to hear. Mrs. Claire looked up, her eyes calm but firm. "My son is mentally retarded. Please understand." The man curled his lips and shook his head slightly, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "If it can't keep quiet, then you two shouldn't be sitting here." Oliver shrank back, hugging his teddy bear tighter. He didn't understand all the words, but he felt them. The coldness, the alienation. And most of all, he felt his mother's hand tighten around him, a silent protection in a compartment full of eyes waiting for his absolute silence. "But you can't." The plane began to taxi down the runway, the roar of the engines shaking the cabin slightly. Oliver huddled in his seat, his little hands clutching his mother's shirt. He didn't like the loud noise. It made his head buzz, making him feel lost and uncomfortable. His mother gently stroked his back, whispering comfort, but the anxiety in her eyes couldn't be hidden. When the flight attendant went to check the seats, a middle-aged man sitting in front spoke in an annoyed voice. "Could you please tell this kid to be quiet? We haven't even taken off yet, and he's already like this. How can he stand the whole flight?" The passengers around them began to glance at them. Some were curious, some frowned, some shook their heads. Oliver's mother squeezed her son's hand tighter, feeling her heart tighten. "Sorry, my son is just a little nervous," she explained softly. The man curled his lips, his voice full of sarcasm. "Worried? How old is this kid? If he can't act like a normal kid, he shouldn't be flying." The words hit Oliver's mother like a slap in the face. She opened her mouth to say something, but a feeling of helplessness weighed heavily on her chest. She couldn't explain to each person on the flight that Oliver was different from other children, that he had a mental disability, that his brain was developing more slowly than normal, that loud noises or sudden changes could set him off. And above all, she didn't want to make her son the focus of pity or criticism. Oliver sensed his mother's tension. He didn't understand the harsh words, but he knew she was upset. And that scared him. He began to squirm in his seat, his breathing coming in short gasps. "I don't want to be here anymore. Mom, I don't want to." There were murmurs all around. A few people shook their heads in disapproval. A young woman sitting 2 rows away turned to her friend and said quietly enough for Oliver's mother to hear, "They shouldn't have put the boy on this flight." The whole cabin felt more cramped and stuffy. Oliver held his mother's hand tightly, tears welling up in his eyes. But no one on the flight knew that, at that moment, the pain in his mother's heart was even greater. The plane had reached a steady altitude, but the atmosphere in the cabin was as tense as a string about to snap. Oliver huddled in his mother's arms, his hands covering his ears against the roar of the engines and the murmur of conversation around him. His mother tried to comfort him, but the unease still swirled around her like a wave that would not be dispelled. Then the worst happened. The flight attendants began serving the meal. The soft clatter of a trolley hitting a chair startled Oliver. A box of food fell to the floor, the plastic cracking dryly. The sound was like a gunshot in midair to Oliver. He shuddered, then suddenly burst into tears. Not the normal cry of a child, but a broken, trembling sob mixed with the rapid breathing of panic. He couldn't take it anymore. No, Oliver screamed, his body shaking violently. He shoved the tray in front of him, spilling orange juice on the table. His fingers dug into his mother's sleeve, as if clinging to the only thing that could save him from this chaos. The passengers around him turned, their eyes filled with anger and annoyance. Holy shit! Again? The man from earlier sighed, his voice filled with contempt. Where's the flight attendant? Please fix it. Another passenger grumbled. A flight attendant quickly ran over, her face still holding a professional smile but her eyes showing hesitation. Dear customer, is your son okay? If needed, we can assist. How is it okay? The other man interrupted, his voice harsh. It's bothering everyone here. Oliver continued to moan, his small hands clutching at his chest as if he couldn't breathe. The boy was so panicked that he couldn't hear anything anymore. To him, all the sounds and eyes around him merged into a giant wave that was about to engulf him. Oliver's mother hugged her son, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. He's just scared. I'll calm him down. Please, everyone. But those pleas seemed to reach no one. A woman sitting nearby let out an exasperated sigh. They shouldn't have put it on the plane. The words were as cold as a knife. Oliver's mother's heart clenched. She wanted to scream that her son was human, that he had as much right to be here as anyone else, that his fear was not a trouble. But her throat was tight. Dear customers, if this situation continues, we may have to. The flight attendant hesitated. What to do? Kick them off the plane in midair? Force Oliver to shut up when he can't control himself? His mother hugged him tightly, tears threatening to fall. Not because she was ashamed, but because her heart was breaking. Oliver was still trembling in his mother's arms, his breathing ragged as if he had been submerged in the ocean and had just surfaced for a breath of air. The murmurs around him were still audible, but they were becoming distant, as if submerged under an invisible layer of water. His mother patted her son's back, her thin fingers stroking his tousled hair. The warmth of her arms was the only thread keeping Oliver from slipping deeper into the darkness of fear. It's okay, baby. I'm here. I'm here. Her voice was trembling but still painfully gentle. From afar, the chief flight attendant approached, her eyes showing a hint of hesitation. Then she bent down and said softly, Do you need any help? Oliver's mother looked up, her eyes tired and hurt. She knew that the words were more than just a greeting. They were a silent warning. If Oliver continued to cause trouble, they might be asked to move to another compartment, or worse. No thanks. He's just scared. I'll calm him down. The head stewardess nodded slightly, but her eyes held doubts. She didn't blame her. She just blamed the world for being too cruel to children like Oliver. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. A boy of about 10, sitting a few rows away, timidly approached. He had soft curly hair and large, round brown eyes as clear as water. Without saying a word, he gently placed a small paper airplane on the seat next to Oliver. Oliver stopped shaking. He blinked, staring at the simple toy. It was a brief moment, but his mother sensed the change. Do you like airplanes? The boy asked softly, his tone devoid of pity or annoyance, but simply genuine concern. Oliver didn't reply, but his little fingers slowly loosened. He reached out and lightly touched the paper plane. All eyes in the cabin were still on them. But this time, Oliver's mother no longer felt like they were sharp knives. Amidst the tension, there was still a glimmer of warmth. Another flight attendant, who had been standing by watching, smiled slightly. She leaned down and said softly, We have a warm blanket in the upper deck. Shall I bring it to the baby? Oliver's mother looked at her, her eyes filled with tears. Not because of pity, but because the kindness had come so unexpectedly, like a ray of light through a cloudy sky. Oliver still didn't say anything, but he stopped crying, and to his mother, that alone was a miracle. The small paper plane rested comfortably in Oliver's hand. The folds were simple but neat, each line a silent reminder that he was not alone on this flight. The curly-haired boy sat nearby, his eyes shining with patient anticipation, neither pressing nor judging. Oliver's mother gently squeezed her son's hand, feeling his heartbeat become more stable. His whole body seemed to no longer be as tense as before. He picked up the paper plane, looked at it for a moment, then timidly pushed it towards the other boy. The plane did not fly far, just hovered lightly on the seat. but the smile that appeared on Oliver's lips almost made his mother cry. The curly-haired boy smiled brightly. "You fly well. Can I fold another one?" Without waiting for an answer, the boy carefully folded another airplane from the napkin on his tray. Oliver followed his every movement, his big eyes shining with interest. Across the row of seats, the middle-aged woman who had been acting annoyed earlier was still looking at them. But now she was no longer frowning. Her gaze softened a little, as if she had noticed something that she had not noticed before. The flight attendant returned. Holding a soft blue blanket, she gently wrapped it around Oliver's shoulders, leaned down and whispered to his mother, "The boy is very strong." Oliver's mother smiled softly, but it was a smile that was both warm and bitter. "Not everyone thinks so." The flight attendant was silent for a moment, then smiled. "Sometimes the world just needs a little time to figure that out." The plane continued to glide gently above the clouds. The engine noise was still steady, but it was no longer as scary as before. Oliver was no longer curled up in the corner of the seat. He was fiddling with the second paper plane in his hands, his eyes full of concentration. The flight was not over yet, but the storm was gradually clearing, and somewhere in the vast sky, a small ray of light had begun to appear. The announcement sounded, signaling that the plane was about to land. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, bathing Oliver's small face in a gentle yet strange light. He still held the paper plane tightly in his hand. The folds on the paper were slightly crumpled, but to him, it was the most precious thing at the moment, a fragile symbol of hope, something that belonged to him in this vast and strange world. Beside him, his mother still gently placed her hand on his back, gently patting him. "Almost there, baby." Oliver didn't react immediately. His eyes were still glued to the paper plane, but his pursed lips showed that he was thinking. After a moment, he turned his head slightly towards his mother, his eyes wavering slightly. He nodded slightly, as if for the first time during the flight, he felt something safe. As the plane touched down on the runway, a slight jolt shook everyone. The sound of seatbelts being unbuckled, and a murmur rose in the cabin as passengers began to stand up to retrieve their luggage. The curly-haired boy next to Oliver also stood up, ready to leave. But before he turned away, he suddenly placed a small piece of paper on the tray table in front of Oliver. Oliver was startled and looked up at the boy. But the boy just smiled slightly and said, very naturally, "Here you go." Then the boy turned away and left the row of seats. Oliver stared at the boy's back, confused, then looked back down at the piece of paper in front of him. His small hands clenched the hem of his pants, then opened them again, hesitant. He glanced at his mother, as if waiting for permission. His mother nodded slightly. Slowly, Oliver picked up the piece of paper and opened it. Inside was a scribbled line, the handwriting not yet round but carrying a strange power. "There's nothing wrong with you. Don't be afraid to fly." Oliver stared at the words, his eyes wide. His fingers trembled as he touched the paper, as if he was afraid it would disappear if he let go. The feeling in his heart was strange. It wasn't joy, but it wasn't fear either. It was something else, something he hadn't experienced enough to name. In the front row, the middle-aged woman from earlier also stood up. She looked at Oliver, her eyes more complicated than before. Perhaps she wanted to say something, but then stopped. She quietly turned away, no longer with the sharp look or contempt as before. Oliver's mother squeezed her son's hand gently. "Let's go." Oliver still held the paper tightly in his hand as they exited the plane. As he walked through the exit, he stopped. The flight attendant from earlier was standing there, smiling kindly. "Nice to fly with you, Oliver." Oliver paused. He looked at the stewardess, then down at the paper in his hand. A strange feeling was growing inside him, a turmoil he had never felt before. The curly-haired boy who was standing in the distance turned his head to look at him. His eyes were filled with anticipation, as if waiting to see what he would do. Oliver swallowed. His small chest heaved, his breathing quickened with anxiety. But in that moment, he remembered what his mother had always said. No matter how noisy the world is, you still have the right to speak up. The boy turned to the flight attendant once more, his eyes sparkling with gratitude, and whispered softly, "Thank." That small voice was like a gentle breeze, gentle but containing a song of the heart. It was the first time Oliver, with the restlessness and innocence of an 8-year-old, dared to say something to a stranger, not his mother, not anyone he knew, but to the whole world. His mother stood there, her heart pounding, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. For a moment she thought she had misheard, but the look on Oliver's face told the truth. The boy bowed his head gently, his small hand still clutching the precious paper. Oliver's smile was not one of triumph or pride, but a pure, warm smile, as if he had just been granted a miracle, a glimmer of light in the gloomy sky. And in a small corner of this big world, 8-year-old Oliver, with a brave heart and pure soul, stepped through the first door of his life, opening a new chapter, full of hope and kindness.